Benedict Spence. Good morning. Merry Christmas also.
Merry Christmas.
We can still say that, can't we?
Sure.
Just about. Let's kick off with The Guardian, Bidisha. Safety checks ordered amid fears of defects in, well, thousands of schools.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all dressed in festive Christmas red, but unfortunately I bring bad tidings. I hate this idea that Britain's crumbling, but this is a full story about how post-war buildings, particularly school buildings, but also courthouses and other sort of municipal buildings, have been constructed out of materials that investigators don't quite know what it is. And this is the thing that gives me pause for consternation. So it's not as though there's a big disaster waiting to happen, but there might be. And it's fascinating to me because we're now far away from that immediate post-war period, that people are looking at the consequences of rebuilding towns, building society, getting that infrastructure there. And we're seeing those buildings which we thought of as being really permanent and protective structures possibly crumbling. So the statistic that sticks out is that 1 in 6 kids is currently going to school in a building that might be in need of improvement.
Where does the money come from?
I mean,
Benedict?
That's a great question. I'd love to know. I'm sure the government would like to know as well, because we need lots of money for all sorts of things, and we just seem to have run out of it, even as we try to tax our way into economic growth. This is, I mean, of course, this comes on the back of the reinforced aerated concrete scandal, and this isn't even necessarily related to that. This is something else, and it's one of those rather curious things when you consider that in this country we're actually very bad at building infrastructure as it is anyway, and that's for reasons of planning. And then when things do go up, actually there is often the issue, which is that it has to be done on the cheap, precisely because margins are so tight in this country. So even now, we are realistically building our way into these sort of problems in the future. And you see this when new housing developments go up. You can actually see it, is the sad thing, that they aren't built to last in the same way that, you know, Victorian or Georgian structures are. And it might sound very old-fashioned to go, oh, well, we used to build things much better in the good old days. But we did build things with the intention of them surviving more than 50, 60 years or so, once upon a time. And that's why central London is still full of, you know, terraced streets of Georgian and Victorian housing, whereas a lot of the stuff that was sort of built in the 60s and 70s is the stuff that's now being knocked down to build glass stuff, which is also going to fall down in the next 50 or so years.
Just on the question of finance, the government have pledged billions, but we don't know what the knock-on effects of all of these investigations are going to be. So the investigation is worth billions. We don't know if we're going to have to rebuild all of this stuff soon.
OK. Let's move on to The Times. And, of course, many reflecting the death of former President Jimmy Carter, aged 100. Where do we start? You know, a peanut farmer to the White House.
The Simpsons referred to him as history's greatest monster, which, you know, is perhaps the harshest thing that you could possibly say. A very short-lived presidency, a rather unfortunate presidency. But, yeah, very humble beginnings. You know, this sort of grew up in the sort of the pre-mechanised era where everything was still pulled by a horse. As much as it was short-lived, and afterwards obviously came Ronald Reagan, and his legacy was very much eclipsed. Nobel Peace Prize winner, not for nothing, and also the man that oversaw the Camp David Accords, which, you know, given what's currently happening with Israel and the Middle East and the fact that there aren't Arab nations currently knocking on the door trying to invade Israel, I think cannot be taken for granted how significant that was. So the longest-lived president in US history, survived only by the current president and the person that's about to become the president.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Jimmy Carter was the underdog, wasn't he? A bit like Donald Trump, president-elect.
It's exactly what Benedict's saying. He wasn't an enormously charismatic or impactful president in that one term that he served. He was supplanted by Ronald Reagan. He just couldn't compete with that level of sort of telegenic TV-age charisma. But, as this great obituary in The Times says, he's the one who defined the role of the activist post-president, which you see the Obamas doing very, very well now. But he invented that role. He dedicated himself, perhaps through a sense of knowing that he hadn't been so impressive in his presidency, to anti-war, to wartime conciliation, to humanitarian and human rights ideals. And these are so important now in this divided world that we look at, and also looking at America as it is now.
Yeah, and it's notable that he received it right in the middle, just after the United States had gone into Afghanistan and just before it was about to go into Iraq. I think it was very prescient that he received it at that moment in time.
Yeah, tributes coming in, of course, from leaders around the world, including Keir Starmer. Can we move on to weight loss jabs? They are prescribed on the NHS, but the waiting list for those
Right.
quite long.
Right, right.
And this is where the problem lies. This is the Express, isn't it?
This
Vidice?
is a huge news story that's been building all year. Some people have seen it in a sort of comical light. I think it's actually really dangerous. Semaglutide is the ingredient that's in these weight loss jabs, which are not weight loss jabs. They're for treating things like diabetes. And you're supposed to only be able to get them if your GP or your doctor gives you a prescription. People who are trying to lose weight quickly are going online to online pharmacies, some of which are real, some of which are absolutely fake, and buying these so-called weight loss jabs. The example that's in the clip that's in the extract we've got is actually of a woman who went onto one of these pharmacies and was given something that contains insulin, which made her crash. It was incredibly bad for her health. You don't know what's in this stuff. And there's actually a really beautiful and very, I think, wise quote by her saying, "I can't believe I let my insecurities replace my concern for my health." I think that shows a huge amount of self-knowledge and self-awareness. And I love that she's speaking up about this stuff, because that's exactly at the core of it. And I'm just so incredibly appalled that this is a fad. It should not be a fad. If you need to lose weight, do it the bog standard way. It's on the NHS website. Do not sign up for weird stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, basically, semaglutides work by starving people, by suppressing you. There's no two ways about it. You just end up eating less, you don't get so hungry. And I've always thought maybe, I'm coming across as very old-fashioned. We used to build things much better back in the good old days, dieting, just not eating so much and doing exercise, that's the way forward.
So we used to have an apple once a day.
Well, the thing is, if you don't actually change the underlying behaviours allow you to get overweight in the first place, actually you're just going to end up yo-yoing, like when you actually crash diet as well.
Okay.
And the example in this is losing 2 stone in 6 months. It's not
We'll leave it there for now, guys. We will be talking about the Daily Star in the next hour. Join us then after a very short break.
There's always more to the news than a headline.